When A Quiet Place Day 1 was announced, there were a number of different reactions one could have for it. On the one hand, it made sense. The original film was set well into a post-apocalypse where the damage to the world had already been done, and a lot of how it came to be was shrouded in mystery. What are these monsters? Where did they come from? Why are they here? It was explored a little with an extended flashback scene in the second movie, which was pretty great to see, and so getting to see a whole movie about that initial alien invasion that started it off seemed like the next logical step. But there were also some potential causes for concern, like the fact that the original director, John Krasinski, was taking more of a backseat this time around, presumably because he was busy directing a furry purple Steve Carell to make loud noises! The opposite of A Quiet Place, if there ever was one. So, with a bit of a different creative vision at the helm, as well as a fairly different premise and characters, it did raise some questions as to how well this was all going to play out. Well, one thing I can give the movie credit for is that the day one aspect of the title is explored really well. I mean, not literally, the movie is actually set over the course of a few days, but it does a great job of showing this world-ending event in its infancy. Since the aliens have only just arrived, there's a greater sense of inexperience on the part of the humans, and a lot of scenes with characters testing the waters for how much noise they're able to make, not knowing if they're going to get away with it, or have a city of monsters tearing them to shreds. It makes for a welcome change of pace from the previous films, which focused on characters who have survived long enough to have a much greater understanding of what they're up against and have had to come up with creative defenses and solutions. It's also great to see this world from the perspective of an urban metropolitan city, rather than the more rural locations from the previous films. It gives a bit more insight into how lethal these aliens are, seeing them tear their way through large crowds of people, leaving damage and debris everywhere they go, as opposed to the more spacious farmlands present in the previous movies. Not to mention seeing them climb and jump across buildings and skyscrapers, so not only do the characters have danger surrounding them, but also leaping at them from above. All that wreckage and larger population also makes for a lot of creative scenarios for action scenes and perilous situations the characters can find themselves in, like navigating a flooding subway tunnel or becoming stuck in a huge crowd of people. All of them desperately trying to avoid making noise while knowing all it would take was one person in this steadily increasing mass to make one slightly loud noise, and all of them would likely die. So from a horror perspective, I think the movie is a pretty solid evolution of the previous films, and it has some new world building as it shows how what little remains of humanity later on got to where they are. So in that regard, I'd say it was a pretty worthwhile prequel. Unfortunately, when it comes to story and characters, any calls for me to be invested fall on deaf ears. The plot basically revolves around Lupita Nyong'o's character, Sam, traveling through this alien-invaded city, risking her life several times in the process, all while the rest of the population tries to evacuate in the brief window while the government is still there to help. So what could be so important to her that she's willing to put herself in mortal danger and risking stranding herself in the middle of this dangerous city? Is she going to save a loved one? Does she have a lead on the alien's weakness? No, something much more important.
Hey, I want pizza.
I'm not joking, that's her honest-to-God goal in all of this. Well, okay, I'm misleading you a little bit. There is at least in theory an interesting reason for her to be doing this. So Sam is a terminally ill cancer patient and has been living with a sense of cynicism and lack of direction for apparently a long time. And the reason she's so gung-ho about getting pizza is because of memories of a happier time getting it with her father when she was a child. So the pizza is basically her one last-ditch attempt to create a spark of joy in her life while she still has a life to spark joy into. All that sounds good, but I never really found her emotional state throughout the movie to be particularly well developed. The movie doesn't do much to dive into that sense of hopelessness that Sam feels beyond just stating matter-of-factly that she's unhappy and just being in a bit of a mood for the opening 20 minutes before the aliens land. You might be thinking, well,
duh.
She's got cancer, she's not exactly going to be pulling a Grandpa Joe on us, is she? And yeah, but there's not much indication of what that means for her specifically. Terminal illness is a very complicated thing to emotionally process, and every patient will confront it in their own way. And there isn't a lot that makes her feel distinct compared to any other character like this. Some choose to make the most of the time they have left, others may unfortunately fall into despair or anger over it, some may even construct elaborate death traps in a twisted attempt to make people's lives more fulfilling. Really, anything's possible.
I want to play a game.
What I want to know is, what is it she values about her life that she's upset she's going to lose, and probably to an extent already has? That's where the interesting characterization is supposed to come in. I mean, Pizza and her father, yes, but it isn't really explored in enough detail for me to be emotionally invested. The rest of the characters don't really do much for me either. Early on, we get a character named Ruben, played by Alex Wolff. At first, he seems like he could be an interesting character to pair with Sam, trying to encourage a greater sense of optimism in her, even though she resists every step of the way and sometimes is even kind of rude to him in response. But he's not really in the movie long enough for that to have any substantial impact on her development, which just kind of feels like a waste. Then there's Henri, played by Jaimin Hunsu, reprising his role from the second film. I'll be honest, I didn't find his character from part 2 all that memorable, so I was hoping that this film would flesh him out a bit more. It did not. So yeah, as you can probably tell, I just didn't really get anything out of pretty much any of the characters in this film. They all just either feel fairly generic or they come and go so quickly that you don't really get much of an impression out of any of them. It's a real shame considering that the family dynamic of the first 2 films was arguably one of their best attributes and added some emotional weight to the story.
If we can't protect them, who are we?
There just aren't any characters present in Day 1 that I found charming or endearing. Except the cat, I like him. I'm not gonna lie, the characters did kind of drag the film as a whole down for me to the point where I found a not insignificant percentage of the film pretty boring. But at the same time, I wouldn't go so far as to call it a bad movie. Like I said, the aspects that I particularly wanted to see out of A Quiet Place prequel do go mostly fulfilled. It maintains the horror elements that worked so well in the previous films and takes them in new directions that feel like natural extensions, and it adds some intriguing world building to a universe that always and still does benefit from dropping scraps of information while still keeping things just that little bit mysterious. As a whole, the movie doesn't have a ton going for it, but what it does have going for it, it's enough. Hey, did you like that video? Well, guess what? You could have seen it even sooner. But not to worry, you can still see my next one sooner by just subscribing to my Patreon. For just $1.50 a month, you'll get access to all my videos before they get released on YouTube, and you'll also get to see a few alternate thumbnails I made while I was working on the video. If you're interested, check it out. Links in the description.